You know that moment when you realize you've been holding yourself together with techniques instead of truth. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just Tuesday. You're standing in a bathroom with the light too bright, staring at your own face like it belongs to someone you vaguely recognize. Or you're in the car with the engine off, parked outside your building, and you can't get out yet. Not because you're lazy, because something in you is heavy and you're trying to remember how to be a person for the rest of the evening. Maybe it shows up at work. You're answering emails like a machine, saying the right words, using the right tone, and inside you're watching yourself do it from a few feet away. Or it shows up in a relationship when someone asks, "Are you okay?" and you say "yeah" with that polite, practiced voice, and you can feel the lie land in your chest like a small stone. There's a particular silence that follows moments like this. A pause between who you've been and who you might have to become. And the part that messes with you is that the silence doesn't always feel like peace. It feels like emptiness, like something is missing. Like the old engine that used to run your life, your certainty, your identity, your sense of control, just stalled. People call that breaking. They say it like it's a moral failure, like you couldn't handle life, like you weren't strong enough. But a lot of the time, breaking isn't weakness. Breaking is structural exposure. It's what happens when something unstable finally has to show itself. When the weight you've been carrying outgrows the story you've been using to carry it. Think about how buildings fail. They don't collapse because one day they decide to be dramatic. They collapse because pressure finds what was already compromised, a hidden crack, a corner that was held up by wishful thinking, a foundation that wasn't built for the load it's now expected to hold. That's what breakdowns do. They don't invent instability, they reveal it. And that's uncomfortable to hear because we want to believe that if we just tried harder, we could keep everything intact. We want to believe that the version of us who can handle it is right around the corner. We just need more discipline, more grit, more positive thinking, more control. But control is the first illusion that tends to dissolve when you truly break. Not because you're cursed, because life has a way of refusing to let you build a future on something that can't carry you. The psychology of identity under pressure is brutal and honest. Your identity isn't just your personality. It's your sense of what you are allowed to be. It's the role you think you have to play to be safe. It's the internal script that tells you how you get love, respect, security, belonging. And when pressure hits, failure, rejection, loss, humiliation, your identity doesn't just feel challenged, it feels threatened, like a part of you is being asked to die. That's why breakdowns feel so personal, not because the event itself is always massive, but because the event touches the exact place you've been using to hold yourself up. It's strange how something small can do it. One conversation where you realize you're not seen the way you thought you were. One moment where you realize you've been overperforming just to be tolerated. One mistake that exposes how fragile your confidence actually was. One loss that shows you what you were using as a crutch. The cracks expose hidden fears. The fears you don't talk about at dinner. The fears you keep under productivity and jokes and "I'm fine." Like the fear that without your role, you're nothing. Like the fear that if you stop proving yourself, you'll be forgotten. Like the fear that if you slow down, everything will fall apart and everyone will blame you. Breaking pulls those fears into the light, and it also exposes the beliefs you didn't know were running you. The false belief that love is earned only through usefulness. The false belief that rest is laziness. The false belief that if you're not in control, you're in danger. The false belief that your worth depends on your outcomes. Strength built on illusion eventually collapses. It has to, because illusion requires constant maintenance. You have to keep performing, keep managing impressions, keep pushing away the parts of reality that don't match your story. And sooner or later, something happens that you can't outwork. That's when you break. Not because you're weak, because something false can't carry you further. This is where people get confused, because they assume breaking is the end of character. They picture character as something you either have or don't. like a trait, like genetics. But character usually forms after ego shatters. Ego is the part of you that wants to stay impressive, the part that needs to be right, admired, untouchable, the part that wants to feel ahead, the part that says, "I'm the kind of person who would never end up like this." So when life brings humiliation, failure, or loss, it doesn't just feel painful. It feels insulting. It feels like it's attacking your self-image. You're not just sad. You feel exposed. You feel seen in a way you didn't consent to. There are people who can handle pain better than they can handle embarrassment. Because pain can be private. Embarrassment is social. Embarrassment threatens identity in public. This is where pride becomes a trap. Pride doesn't always look like arrogance. Sometimes it looks like, "I can handle it." Sometimes it looks like never asking for help. Sometimes it looks like staying in something that's hurting you just to avoid admitting you misjudged it. Sometimes it looks like a calm face while your inner world is burning. Pride delays growth because growth asks for humility. And humility isn't self-hate, it's reality. It's the willingness to stop arguing with what is. Ego death is not personal destruction. That's an important distinction because people hear ego and imagine spiritual extremes, like you need to dissolve your personality and float around the world smiling at clouds. Ego death, in the lived human sense, is simpler. It's the moment you stop needing to be the character you've been playing. It's the moment you can admit quietly, "I don't know." It's the moment you can face the fact that you were wrong about something without your whole identity collapsing. Ironically, ego often collapses before your life actually gets better. That's why it feels like falling. Because the thing you used to rely on, your certainty, your persona, your ability to look fine, starts to crack. But when ego stops running the show, something else begins. Character. Character isn't a costume. It's what remains when you can't perform anymore. It's what you do when nobody's impressed. It's what you choose when your old rewards aren't working. It's what grows when you stop needing life to flatter you. Humility often marks the turning point because humility is the first honest relationship with reality. And reality is where growth actually happens. Now, here's something that can feel unfair. Pain reorganizes your priorities. Comfort almost never does. Comfort can make you stable. It can make you functional. It can make you polite. But comfort rarely rearranges your soul. Most people don't transform because life is going well. They transform because something stopped working. Crisis clarifies what matters because crisis strips away the optional. When you're comfortable, you can keep pretending the important things will be addressed later. Later becomes a lifestyle. You can keep telling yourself, "When I have more time, I'll take care of my health. When things calm down, I'll reconnect with people. When I feel more confident, I'll make the change." Crisis doesn't let you negotiate like that. It forces the question into the present. What are you actually living for? What is worth your energy? What are you sacrificing? And is it worth it? Pain has a way of compressing life. It makes the unnecessary feel loud and pointless. It makes certain conversations feel urgent. It makes certain habits feel embarrassing. It makes certain fantasies feel like they're made of paper. From a nervous system perspective, something shifts too. When you're in survival mode, your mind narrows. It scans for threat. It reacts fast. It interprets everything through protection. That's why a text can ruin your mood. That's why a tone can feel like danger. Your system is trying to predict and control because it thinks you're under threat. But after a collapse, after enough disappointment, after enough failure, after enough "I can't do this the old way," a strange thing can happen. The survival strategy weakens. Not because you're suddenly safe, but because the old way of staying safe doesn't work anymore. And in that weakening, awareness can expand. Discomfort sharpens perception. Again, not because pain is good, because discomfort breaks the trance. It interrupts autopilot. It forces you to be present with what you've been avoiding. Breaking rearranges what you value, and that changes your trajectory. You might not feel it immediately. Sometimes it's quiet. You start caring less about certain things that used to consume you. You start caring more about things you used to ignore. Your priorities shift, not because you decided to be different, but because your system has been reorganized by experience. This is also the stage where you start losing things you thought you needed. Not always physically, sometimes psychologically. You lose roles, the responsible one, the strong one, the easygoing one, the one who never asks for anything, the one who is always fine, the one who can endure anything. You lose status, not necessarily social status, but internal status. The feeling that you know what you're doing, the feeling that you're ahead, the feeling that you're special in a way that protects you from ordinary pain. You lose certainty, and certainty for many people is their favorite drug. It gives you the illusion that if you understand enough, you can avoid suffering. Loss dissolves the illusion of control, and the illusion of control is what most people confuse with stability. Control says, if I manage everything correctly, nothing will hurt me. Stability says, even if things hurt, I can stay with myself. That's different. That's deeper. That's not something you get from perfect planning. That's something you build through internal self-reliance. Loss forces you inward because the external crutches don't hold the same way anymore. Maybe you used to rely on approval. Maybe you relied on productivity. Maybe you relied on being needed. Maybe you relied on a relationship that made you feel safe even if it was draining you. Maybe you relied on certainty as a shield. When those things fall away, it can feel terrifying. And it can also be the beginning of actual resilience. Detachment gets misunderstood here. People hear detachment and imagine coldness. But detachment, in a grounded sense, is learning not to tie your whole identity to things you can't control. It's learning not to collapse every time something shifts outside you. It's learning to keep your dignity even when your plans break. Greatness, if we can use that word without making it cheesy, often requires subtraction before expansion. You don't add your way into a new life. You remove what can't come with you. You lose what you thought you needed so you can discover what you actually need. And then comes the part nobody romanticizes, the silent phase after collapse. This is the phase where you're exhausted, but not restful. Where you're confused, but not curious. Where you know something ended, but you don't know what's beginning. Where you can't go back, but you don't feel ready to go forward. It can look like nothing from the outside. You're still functioning. You still show up. You still make dinner. You still pay bills. You still laugh at something dumb online. But inside, there's a gap. The gap between breakdown and rebuilding. And the mind hates gaps. The mind wants immediate narratives. It wants to label. It wants to know. It wants to explain. So it gets impatient with this phase. It starts calling it failure. It starts calling it being stuck. It starts panicking that you're wasting time. But nothing feeling clear at first is part of the process, because clarity isn't always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it's a slow settling. Sometimes it's the fog thinning 1 degree at a time. This is where learning to tolerate uncertainty matters. Not as a motivational slogan, as a survival skill. If you can tolerate the quiet after breaking, if you can resist the urge to refill your life with noise just to avoid the discomfort, reconstruction begins. Not as a big plan, as a subtle shift. You start noticing what you can no longer do in good faith. You start noticing what drains you faster than it used to. You start noticing what feels honest. You start noticing what feels performative. You start seeing the difference between doing something because it's who you are and doing something because you need to be seen a certain way. In this quiet phase, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to rebuild using the old narrative. They try to patch the old identity. They try to become the same person, but stronger. They try to return to normal, but you can't return to who you were when the thing that broke you was tied to who you were. That's not punishment, that's evolution. So rebuilding means rebuilding without the old narrative. It means creating new standards, not for performance, for integrity. New standards like, I don't abandon myself to keep peace. New standards like, I don't confuse anxiety with intuition. New standards like, I don't make decisions just to be liked. New standards like, I don't treat my nervous system like an enemy. This kind of rebuilding isn't built on motivation. Motivation is volatile. It comes and goes. Motivation is the mood of the day. Reconstructed identity is quieter. It's what you do when you don't feel inspired. It's what you do when you're tired. It's what you do when nobody's watching. It's what you do when old cravings show up. Self-trust is rebuilt through small actions, not massive reinventions. It's rebuilt when you follow through on tiny promises to yourself. When you rest when you said you would. When you speak honestly one time you used to perform. When you pause before reacting. When you say no without explaining yourself into exhaustion. Integrity replaces performance in this phase because you're done living for applause. Or at least, you're tired of what it costs. Performance is exhausting because it's never finished. There's always a new audience, a new benchmark, a new way to prove you're okay. Integrity is simpler, not easier. Simpler. It's alignment. And then one day later, you look back at the collapse and something changes in how you see it. You stop seeing it as the catastrophe that ruined you. You see it as the turning point that upgraded you, not because suffering is romantic, not because pain is the goal, but because pain removed what couldn't grow with you. Pain stripped away the false supports. Pain exposed the unstable structure. Pain forced the ego to loosen. Pain reorganized your priorities. Pain took away what you thought you needed and made you discover what you actually needed. There are strengths you can only build when your old identity is no longer an option. There are boundaries you can only set when your people-pleasing finally becomes unbearable. There are truths you can only accept when denial stops working. There are parts of you that only wake up when your old life can't sedate them anymore. So this isn't a celebration of breaking. It's a reframing, a way to understand what breaking actually is. Breaking is not the end of you. It's the end of what was false. And if you're in the quiet phase right now, if you feel exhausted, uncertain, slightly hollow, like you don't recognize yourself the way you used to, there's one gentle thing you might try that doesn't require you to force an answer. The next time you feel that impulse to fix yourself immediately, to rush into a plan just to escape discomfort, it can help to do something smaller. You might sit for a minute with your hand on your chest or your stomach, somewhere you can actually feel your body, and take 3 slow breaths that are just slow enough to tell your system, we're not being chased. Then, without trying to be profound, you might ask yourself one quiet question. What can't I pretend anymore? Not, what should I do? Not, how do I solve my life? Just, what can't I pretend anymore? Because that question doesn't demand performance. It invites honesty. And honesty is the first building material of the next version of you. The rebuilding process doesn't usually feel like becoming great. It feels like becoming real. It feels like choosing the honest thing a little more often. It feels like letting your life simplify. It feels like not needing to be impressive all the time. It feels like letting the cracks exist without rushing to cover them. And eventually, the silence after the fracture stops feeling like emptiness. It starts feeling like space. Space where something true can take shape. Space where the old story can finally stop narrating everything. Space where you can build a life that isn't held together by illusion. Because you don't break because you're weak. You break because something false can't carry you further, and you don't become more whole by pretending you never cracked. You become more whole when you let what broke become the place where you rebuild.